very much, Mike. Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel discussion on the role of Chief Legal Counsel to the Governor. I am honored that the Rappaport Center has asked me to moderate this panel on an important topic of state government and related law and policy. The flyer for our panel makes the claim that the job of the Chief Legal Counsel to the Governor is the best and most varied job in state government. The job may also be one of the least understood and least defined. We hope that this panel may give some aid in curing both of these conditions. Some in this room probably know the job as one of great importance to the governor and the entire executive branch. You may also know of the influence that the job has in matters involving other branches of government, including the governor's review of legislation passed by the legislature or proposed, and in his selection of judges, another very important function. What fewer know is that the position lacks any constitutional, statutory, or common law definition. The position has no organic statute, as the ad law teachers like to say. I found one state statute concerning legal services to be provided to the Commonwealth under contract.
Thank you, David.
That refers to a decision by Chief Legal Counsel. Under federal and state constitutional and administrative law, it would be unlikely that the counsel would be even deemed an officer, as he could not be said to be exercising significant authority of the Commonwealth under its constitution and laws. In fact, his federal counterpart, the White House counsel, occupies similarly incongruous space, that is, close proximity to and influence over the exercise of power, but no legal power of his or her own. It is perhaps for this reason that the position of the Chief Legal Counsel to the Governor has received little public or scholarly attention. It doesn't even have a catchy popular name, like AG or IG or DA or SCOTUS or the newly branded MassDOT. The CLC or the CLCG doesn't really roll off the tongue. And consularity and the power behind the throne both carry historical baggage. Maybe by the time we break, we will have at least thought of a catchy new brand for this best and most varied job. Our panelists certainly can help. They are one current and three former Chief Legal Counsels to the Governors of Massachusetts. First, my far left, Lon Povich, the current Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Charles Baker, and also a former Deputy Legal Counsel to Governor William Weld. Second, to his right, Don Stern, Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Dukakis, currently with Affiliated Monitors in Boston. Dan Winslow, Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Mitt Romney, and now Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Rimini Street, a software company. And to my immediate left, Kate Cook, Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Deval Patrick, and now at the Boston law firm of Sugarman, Rogers, Barshak, and Cohen. We note, of course, that Lon Povich, as the current job holder, must be more constrained in his comments.
I made him say that.
And we hope that any questions directed to him will accommodate that fact. We will ask the panelists a series of questions, then reserve 15 or 20 minutes at the end for your questions. I would like to thank Paul Johnson, Chief Legal Counsel to Governors Weld and Cellucci, and Pat Moore, Deputy Legal Counsel to Governor Patrick, for their help in the preparation of some of the questions today. First question for all of you. Upon taking the position, how did you define your role? And I'm going to start with Don as the person who served first, so to speak, and chronologically. In that respect, we might see how the role may have evolved through administration.
How did I define the role?
How did you define the role upon taking office?
It's, you know, to some extent it defines you. So that's the starting point. You come in, there are certain, and I think we all share this experience, there are certain givens with the job, there are certain things that you have to do by nature of the job. review legislation before the governor signs it, provide recommendations to the governor as to, on legal issues, not policy issues necessarily, whether to veto or not veto, whether to send back amendments, as you can do under the state constitution. But the job, to some extent, is defined by the crisis du jour, and I think, frankly, you take on the character of the governor. So in my case, the Governor Dukakis made clear that there were certain substantive areas that I was to be the point person on. Ethics, anything to do with ethics, anything to do with an investigation or matter of integrity within state government, not necessarily just in the governor's office, but throughout state government. Anything to do with criminal justice, and anything to do with the courts, and regrettably, well, I'm sure we'll get to this, anything to do with the governor's counsel, not counsel to the governor, but the governor's counsel, which you may explain to the people what that is. But it's a sort of relic of colonial times, embedded in the state constitution, where elected representatives from out the Commonwealth pass on certain matters, including judicial nominees. And it's kind of a relic. I had the misfortune of working for a governor who, in his first term, campaigned on amending the Constitution to get rid of the Executive Council. So when I came in, I was not a fan, nor was the governor a fan. Since part of what he wanted to do was to get rid of him.
Dan, how did you define the role, or how was it defined for you, and did the nature of the governor have an influence on it?
Well, I inherited all of Don's core tasks, so thank you for those, Don. We had, it was the year after 9/11. The state's then $29 billion budget had a $3 billion hole, give or take, which is a pretty big hole for the size of a budget of that size. And so the biggest thing that I was tasked with immediately, well, two things. One was to help solve I want to shout out to Attorney General Harshbarger, who's joined us. Yeah, I know, you're just trying to keep me honest, General. To help solve that deficit, that hole in the budget. And we had 600 lawyers in the agencies, throughout the agencies of state government, but they all were operating basically as little molecules unto themselves, and every lawyer thought of the agency head as their client. And what we wanted to see if we could do is somehow organize all of the lawyers throughout the executive agencies through the governor's chief counsel's office to effectively have a big law firm. And the statute that was mentioned at the outset was actually one of the consequences of that plan, because when I started, lawyers in one agency were forbidden by criminal law from helping lawyers in another agency. And so, for example, I had 30 lawyers that were real estate experts doing right-of-way work in the DOT, the Department of Transportation. But if somebody encroached on parkland, the Parks Department had to go out and hire outside real estate counsel to, say, get off of our land. And I thought that was nuts, but they couldn't. We had 30 real estate lawyers, we couldn't use them. So we tried to create, and we actually had an intranet called the VLO, the Virtual Law Office, and we gave all of the lawyers in state government for $10 a lawyer, which was Texas's rate, Westlaw, which they'd never had before. And we try to create this virtual law office where we could work across agency lines, not by agency, but by specialization. That was the big task. The second big task was sort of an encroaching storm cloud of corruption that was touching into the judiciary of a probation scandal. And I had been a judge just before taking the job, and I had seen sort of from the inside point of view what was happening with some of the patronage and the appointment process, and there was a concern that process, that cloud, if you will, could very easily spill into the judicial selection process itself. And so the other major immediate task that I had was to reform the judicial selection process in Massachusetts to have it be merit selection, including some over-the-top stuff at the time, like we have now and still blind review of judicial applications. So if you put your name in, nobody knows it's you. They don't know who's backing you. They don't know who your references are. All they have is what you've accomplished, how you write, things, but they don't know anything about you in terms of who's backing you as a judge.
These seem to be connected in the sense that both of you agree that there was no formula handed you when you arrived, but that, through your own creativity or the crises of the day, there was at least a presumption of some kind that matters touching on, law and judiciary and those matters of that
Yeah,
sort.
and I should add, and this I'm sure with all of it, any litigation that was being handled by the State Attorney General's office, we would be, in certainly important matters, not in run-of-the-mill matters, we would be the point person for the administration to the extent the governor was interested in litigation. By that I mean challenges to administrative actions that were in the courts. He would look to, or in the case of Jane Swift, she would look to the chief legal counsel to be the point person with the AG's office.
Kate, how did you view your job upon arrival there?
So similar to what's already been said, certainly my job was expected to do the kinds of things that both Don and Dan mentioned, ethics, judiciary, et cetera. But I had been a deputy counsel to Governor Patrick for 3 years and then spent 2 years as his cabinet and policy affairs director. So I knew the office pretty well, and since I was a deputy, had been assigned a lot of those tasks, not as the leader, but as kind of more akin to being an associate in a firm. So knew how the office was run, but I was Governor Patrick's final chief legal counsel, so we had 2 years left, and so it was very clear, in addition to those normal tasks, a few things that we wanted to accomplish, and one was to hopefully grant clemency to folks, and so we spent a lot of our legal willpower reviewing applications and working with the parole board, and then ultimately working with the governor's council to work on pardon request and clemency request. And there was a judicial pay raise that was passed, and we'd heard rumblings that it was coming through the legislature, which meant we anticipated some early retirements, which meant more vacancies than just the folks that would be turning 70. So we knew we needed to, if we wanted to, which Governor Patrick did want to fill as many vacancies as possible, and we did. So during my 2 years, we actually filled 75 judicial vacancies, which was a lot of work, and that was one of my main focuses. And then finally, as one of BC's finest, Meredith Fierro knows, because she was one of our fine legal interns for that last stretch, the legal office was in charge of making sure we had a great archival system that was transparent and accessible, and we worked very closely with the Secretary of State's office to comply with the records retention rules and get everything in shape. And Meredith literally went through a lot of boxes and physically and intellectually gave a lot to that project, but that was a lot of work as well. We had the first digital archives, I believe, of any governor.
Well, we're going to get back to that last stage, but it can't resist noting that any first-year students here might have been just through Marbury versus Madison, so they're kind of picturing you at midnight, the last batch of commissions that you were signing. But Lon, you were a deputy prior to becoming
Well, there was
chief
an
counsel, but there
18-year hiatus.
Right,
Really, yeah.
that's right. And so if you remember anything about that earlier time, what have you brought from that previous experience to defining your new role?
Well, I think that Kate left almost nothing for me to do, but I've managed to be very busy. So I think one thing that might help the context of the office, I mean, the governor's office has a number of functions, including the chief legal counsel, and how the legal counsel integrates with that function is important somewhat to understand the role. I mean, as Kate said, there's sort of a cabinet relations or chief of staff function, which is what it says, helps the governor, works on the policy issues, quote, policy issues more, not the legal side. So you have to coordinate with that group. That's a lot of the work. We work very closely with, my folks are divided among secretariats, Health and Human Services, Public Safety, and the like, and they pair up with the folks in cabinet relations on policy initiatives. So that's one piece of it. There's also a big appointments process for all the boards and commissions that the state has, and people have to get appointed, they have to get vetted, they have just because they have lives, they have potential ethical issues, all that has to come through the office. There's a constituent services function. That too, we have less to do with that, but we coordinate with that. We do a lot with the folks who deal more directly with the legislature. Get called in, can you talk to Senator so-and-so about this bill that you want to move? So in addition to all those things that are core functions that are just chief legal counsel functions, or primarily chief legal counsel functions, there's a lot that we do with the other parts of the governor's office and with the other constitutional offices like the Attorney General's office.
Let's turn to the question of who is your client, as you see it. You're a lawyer, there's a governor. Your title is Chief Legal Counsel to the governor. Sort of a personal aspect of the title. That's different than Attorney General, even where, under the U.S. system, the Attorney General is serving at the pleasure of the president. And certainly in the state system, where the Attorney General is separately elected and wouldn't therefore be seen as the personal counselor, to the governor, ordinarily. So the question is, with this title that seems to describe a personal relationship, how do you define who the client is in your day-to-day work?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
The client is the governor in his official role and the staff that supports him in their official role. I don't do his personal work, I don't do his campaign work, I don't do anything like that. I do, things like vetoes, legislation, the types of things that we all describe, the exercise of his power. I was gonna make some joke about everything the people in the Baker administration did in the first 4 months was shovel snow. But, somebody had to write the executive order that allowed.
But not
right.
very well.
Well, not in your neighborhood this year. Somebody had to, work on the executive order that closed the roads, right? That was the governor being the governor. And that extends to advising his staff, the members of the governor's office, on things relating to his official duty. It's just not to him. But it's a very, because I was a deputy, prior life, it is interesting to see the difference between the deputy's job and the chief legal counsel's jobs, because, you are the lawyer to the governor. And my team is very visible to the governor and does a lot for them. But at the end of the day, somebody has to be the chief legal counsel, and that was all of us at our time.
Would any of you three like to add perspectives on this question of who is the client, or where you felt there was a tension arising?
I agree with what Lon said. It's the governor in his official capacity. But having said that, part of what you do is work with agency counsel. So there's a kind of a head lawyer for the Department of Public Health, and there's a head lawyer for the Department of Public Safety, et cetera, et cetera. And, those cabinet secretaries, in some cases, will have slightly different views from the governor. And there are times that you have to basically, to some extent, you're the chief lawyer for the administration. As Dan was saying, he made greater efforts than ever I tried to kind of organize that. I never really went to that lens, but to some extent you want to, and I took my cues from the governor. So if the Secretary of Public Safety wanted to, if the governor was upset because the state police were doing, too many roadblocks for drunk drivers, or not doing it in the way that he thought was appropriate, or, I would be the one to usually deliver that message. And so in one sense, I was the lawyer for the administration, but my client, the one who's had the final word, so to speak, was the governor.
Yeah.
Similar to Don, except that I saw the administration and the governor really as one. The Constitution describes the governor as the supreme executive magistrate, so at the top of the food chain, on the executive side sits the governor with the council, but the governor at the top of the food chain. And we didn't want to have the agencies going off on their own. We had a really interesting policy issue evolve at the tail end of my tenure, in that the Supreme Judicial Court, in the Goodrich decision, legalized same-sex marriage. And had we not had the level of connection between the legal departments of the agencies, public health and others, we would have had a really interesting disparate approach to that very interesting issue. And it was very coordinated because of that. Just the legal knitted it together, because the agencies do have competing, and I think oftentimes, healthy tension between the agencies. You have the state police are doing too many roadblocks, the tourism people get really mad, and
Right.
things like that. So the legal function can somewhat harmonize the governor's view of the world, so that when the governor says something up here, 10 steps up in the org chart, that way down here it happens, and the lawyers are the way to help make that so.
Right. But the cue is coming from
the governor.
the office that you're
Yeah, the governor.
describing as the client.
And it-
Kate, any thoughts?
Not much to add. I do agree it's a healthy tension between the general counsels at the agency level, who are excellent, many of which lived through multiple administrations, so they've seen a lot more than you have probably for your 2-year snapshot as chief legal counsel. But they also serve at, they might serve, their cabinet secretary who serves at the pleasure of the governor. So ideally, we're all on the same page. And there's also, I think, often a tension with the excellent lawyers at the Attorney General's office who, you raised this, Tom, have an interesting function since it is an elected office, and they specialize in the litigation matters. In the governor's legal office, we're not going into court representing the administration. I think it's not a perfect metaphor, but it's kind of like we're the in-house counsel and they're the outside counsel, and you're trying to help make sure when they're representing the administration in court, it is the governor's view, but they weren't always on the same page.
Well, with one important exception.
Yes.
Which is that the Attorney General gets to set the
Yeah.
legal policy for the Commonwealth. And having worked twice in administrations where the governor is in a different party than the Attorney General, that can be its own interesting dynamic.
We had that dynamic even from the same party.
Right.
At times.
So
It,
this is when I'm going to invoke I'm not going to talk about anything.
Well, you started
But
it.
General Hochberger and I, when Attorney General Hochberger was there, we were at our first round of Indian gaming. Can I tell a quick little story? So my first week in the office, I get invited to a meeting with a representative of a national casino company and a local lobbyist and an Indian rights lawyer out of Washington. And they represent the Wampanoag Aquina tribe of Martha's Vineyard. And they're making the pitch to one of the governor's staffers, and I was invited that they should be allowed to open a casino on the mainland in southeastern Massachusetts, or they would open a high-stakes bingo parlor on Martha's Vineyard, and that would be a devastating thing. And I could not help myself. I started laughing immediately, which was not the most professional thing I could do. And they said, well, why are you laughing? I said, well, because when I left this building 18 years ago, I had been meeting with representatives of national gaming companies, Washington gaming lawyers, and local lobbyists, who told me that if they didn't get a casino in New Bedford on the golf course, they were going to open a high-stakes bingo parlor in Martha's Vineyard. And I just can't worry about it. I'm really sorry. But General Hochberger and I were on, my client, Governor Weld, was in favor of expanded gaming then at the racetracks and a Wampanoag casino in New Bedford. And General Hochberger had a different point of view on that. And even though he was our lawyer in most things and did a superb job, we would testify on opposite sides of bills. So it was very professional and very polite, but there can certainly be differences of opinion between the Attorney General and his or her office and the governor and his or her office.
Right, so a little more context might be necessary for the students, because you tend to follow the governmental arrangements and know the federal model where the Attorney General of the United States is serving at the pleasure of the President. And so, based on everything you just heard, you might be wondering about this state arrangement, the one that prevails in many of the states, vast majority of the states, where there's this independent legal actor who, has roles, including significant roles in litigation. So the question to ask, I think, today is, how much of the fact that the state has an independent elected attorney general influences the duties of the governor's counsel? I don't know, how we measure that on the fly today, but it's a question worth asking, because some of the duties, might be said to be assigned to an attorney general in a system where the attorney general is the direct subordinate of the governor. Alaska, New Jersey are two come to mind, where some of these matters, law, justice, judge picking, and all the rest, there'll be at least some decision made about allocating that function. Massachusetts has a model with the independent AG where the governor, doesn't appoint or fire the attorney general. And so maybe that without going into all of the law about the independence, it's something we should note today, because through the years, it's probably influenced your job,
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah.
of that independence. So,
And we also have situations where at times either the governor or the attorney general are up for reelection, and that impacts that relationship as well.
that's on the list,
Just
too.
to state the
for-
obvious,
That's on
but
the list, too,
it's a
right.
reality.
Well, put the Attorney General to the side for the moment. I know a few of you mentioned the crises of the day or work with other staff members, and I wondered whether you might want to describe a little bit more of your function in relation to other members of the governor's senior staff.
Sure. So in Governor Patrick's office, we had what we called the senior team, which includes, chief legal counsel, often deputy chief legal counsel, the press secretary, the chief of staff, the head of advance, which is really the person that's out in the field or organizing people who attend events with the governor. And we would have a call every morning, sharp, that team with the governor at 7:45 a.m. every day. I did that for 4 years, going through the day, the policy issues of the day, and then the finale would be our press person had been up since like 4:30 and read all the news items and goes through them, and then sometimes there's a conversation on the call, and then the day starts, and you're like, great, today I'm going to work on clemency, and I'm really going to find out. The last time it was done, Jane Swift, I think, did 12, and I'm going to work on this. And then by the time I'd get to the office within an hour, there would be a million new things, and that whole senior team would usually reconvene together and put our heads together about how to handle whatever the issue was. And we did have organized, and it varied depending on the chief of staff and the rhythm of the office. Sometimes we always had a morning meeting, sometimes we always had an end-of-day meeting, and there was some regular, I'm talking about that senior team, because you're asking about the interactions with the staff. I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, and I think you bring, they're probably inferring that, and on those matters, you're bringing a legal perspective as to those that have some legal aspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
But if you know me, I'm not one to hold my tongue.
Yeah,
So
I know.
I brought my other opinions to the table as well about whatever the matter might be. And honestly, by the time I was chief legal counsel, I worked for Governor Patrick at that point for, I worked all 7 of the 8 years. So I had a lot of institutional knowledge as well. And the 1 year I didn't work for him, I was in Senate Ways and Means as general counsel. So I had some understanding of the great and general court, and brought that to the table too. So, but yes, my reason for being there, I think, was to provide the legal end. But you function as an organism, with
Right.
folks sharing ideas and really in a collegial manner. That is one of the things I love about government lawyering in all places. So
I wonder, though, and maybe someone has a perspective, in some organizations, it's a lawyer who might be more inclined to say no sometimes than others in the room. Do you have any basis to cast your own role in that?
I'm not sure if this is responsive to your question. I mean, for me, the hardest transition, I mean, I had spent 7 years in the state attorney general's office earlier in my career. I think I probably hired Tom, as an assistant AG. So I had a lawyer's perspective, and in terms of like litigation with the AG's office, I thought I was smarter than they were. So I was not unencumbered in saying, this is how you ought to handle litigation. But so for me, the transition was moving from the lawyer's role to the policy role, because the governor, in my case, Governor Dukakis, wanted me to be a good lawyer, but he also wanted me to be more than that. And it took me a little while to get my sea legs to understand what Kate's saying, that if there's a discussion about policy, my inclination was to say, this is legal, this is not legal, here are the gray areas, here's some ways in which you might change the policy. Really, what the governor wanted me to do was to bring to bear that plus what's a good policy? Well, what will work? How do you bring people together, because there are different views in the administration? What will be the public perception of that? Because PR becomes critical, and how the media and the legislature is going to look at it, and how citizens are going to look at it. For me, that was a growing period. It took me a little while to kind of understand that part of the job, which you probably knew, Kate, because you were there for years, and Lon knew from his prior.
Yeah, you guys knew what you're getting into, Don and I.
Yeah, I do think of that. It's a lot in the middle of the night, but it was very interesting. I was at a firm. I was at a federal prosecutor, and I was in the governor's office in like the first 10 years of my career, and then I left the governor's office, and I spent the next 18 years or so as general counsel of 2 big companies. So I came back to this job as a general counsel role. And one time during my general counselship, I was very happy where it was, but somebody asked me to go and interview, and I interviewed with the CEO of this big company, a guy named Charlie Baker, for it to be his job, take his job, and he was going to run for governor, so I didn't take it. But in the middle of that interview, I said to him, well, he said, he asked me a question, and all I remember is I answered, well, I'm really not a no lawyer, I'm really a yes lawyer. And he lit up. And from that moment forward, I always told people that especially in-house, which is a role like this, you have to sell yourself as a yes lawyer. One, because that's what your clients want. They want to know how to get from here to there, yes. And secondly, when you say no, it means so much more than if you say no all the time.
Right.
You have to say no sometimes. I said no twice this afternoon to people, clearly did not make them happy. And they, can I do this, can I do that? No. So you have to say no, but you really, when you're a lawyer, you want to pitch yourself as yes to help your client get from A to B and not no. You may not get there the direct line, but somehow get to where you want to get to.
Lon, have you noticed, excuse me, have you noticed any difference in your participation as a member of a senior team in a corporate setting and a member of the senior team in the governmental?
Yeah, I think there is more of an openness in the government piece to express your policy, to get beyond the purely legal than there is in a company. Even if you're in the senior team of the company, I think you get pigeonholed as the lawyer more. In government, hopefully people of talent come together. You get hired by the person who you're working for. You're not the lawyer who shows up. In our case. So I think there is more. You get more room to play off the bat.
Dan, views on their role as the governor's senior team?
Well, I wanted to second what Lon said, and this is key takeaway for law students, whether you go into private practice or into public service. It's easy to say no. It doesn't require any creativity. There's no risk in saying no. The expectation perhaps is that the lawyers are always, the deal-breaking team if you're in the transactions side. And I think that where you really test yourself in your professional prowess and your intellect and your creativity is to figure out how. I understand where the client wants to get to, and they can't get to it by that particular path. But there's always different paths, usually different paths, short of indictment, to get to a place where the client wants to get to. And if I think also lawyers have to realize that at the end of the day, your job is to advise the people that actually have the decision power. And you can just give great advice and not to personalize it. If somebody chooses, with the benefit of full information, not to take your advice, don't take it personally, go on to the next issue. And if things blow up, then you've sort of made your point that you were right, and maybe they'll listen to you next time. So I think it's very important to talk about, whether in business or in politics or in government, doesn't matter. Be a problem-solving lawyer, because that's the value that lawyers bring to any organization.
I'd like to give all of you a chance to comment on things that I think has been touched but is important, and that would be the roles as they're organized in relation to the other branches of government and other executive officers. So we'll ask each of you, you can pick one or two anecdotes or views about the relation, but they'd be duties related to the legislature, duties related to the judiciary, including nominations, and duties related to other executive officers, those under the governor, and those independent, like the AG. Would you like to start, Kate?
Sure. I'm like, do I understand the question? I went first last time.
Right, okay.
Should I blame Pat more for this outline?
Who hired him?
Anything to do with relations with other governmental actors that you thought were particularly challenging?
Sure. Well, particularly challenging. We've alluded to the Governor's Council. It's I think you called it the colonial body.
Vestige.
Vestige.
I often
The only
say-
time you ever used the word vestige, by the way, have you noticed that?
And I know we referred to the fact that there's some similarities, but there's some differences with the federal model. And I think in today's day and age in Massachusetts, the main role our Governor's Council has is that they approve nominations to the judiciary, and they also have to approve any clemency. They also sign the warrant, but the real areas where they have debate and dialogue are about judicial nominations and pardons and clemency. And I think for all chief legal counsel, it is usually one of our many roles that we're, at least by Governor Patrick, it was always the chief legal counsel's. We were the point person for dealing with the Governor's Council. And we had 8 members, and Lieutenant Governor is actually a member of the Governor's Council. During my tenure, about 3 months in, I lost my 9th deal-breaking vote, or tie vote, and therefore really had to work closely with the council to get anyone through, because we had 8. And unfortunately, I think 3 folks got a 4-4 vote and lost, and it's tough. I could go on. I could talk about this relationship for a long time, but that also meant under the Constitution, if Lieutenant Governor is usually the one who historically Dan can quote the Constitution verbatim on how it's worded, but essentially moderates the council and only votes if the governor is present, and you usually only have the governor come and the lieutenant governor vote if you need to, but meaning that it's a close vote. But that meant when we lost our lieutenant governor, the Governor Patrick had to attend every Wednesday's hearing, which the Commonwealth is large, and Governor Patrick really made it a priority to govern the whole state, and so that changed his calendar drastically. And like I said, we did 75 judicial appointments successfully during that time, so you can imagine how that really changed a lot of things. But it also meant that every week he saw the counselors, and it became much more part of his weekly dynamic. And these are politically elected folks who have constituents, who have other issues having nothing to do with their, but can you look at this, or have you heard about the problem with something or other?
Right.
And so it did change a lot of, I think, his role and mine for that last 2 years.
Well, and we know that it occupies a lot of time for every chief legal counsel, but notice it's the structure that's driving this in part. That is, okay, you have this chief legal counsel, only 4 or 5 assistants, but a significant effort, based in that small little law firm as to all judicial nominations. Contrast federal model where, most of the descriptions of Supreme Court nominations, some Court of Appeals nominations, reveal a significant DOJ role in all of this, so the president has the aid, not that the White House counsel isn't deeply involved also, but you have the aid of a massive law firm as well. Whereas here, this independent structure of state AG and this executive council, as it's being described, is itself another example of a fractured executive branch, another separate body, all, it's driving your lives, because of the structure. I think it affects the office. Dan, would you like to pick?
Sure, yeah. I mean, first I want to
or
say,
another branch.
is there anybody who's a 3L here? Anybody a 3L? Okay. Well, state government all over the country, this is the baby boomers. We're going to have a shortage of state workers in the next 5 years. So if you go to mass.gov and put in the word counsel as a search term, anything that's of interest to you, anything, any topic, just imagine any topic that's of interest to you, there is a legal component to it at state government, and they're hiring. So just to put it out there that if you are interested.
I don't think Winslow's hiring.
No. Well, Baker's cutting, but no, but they'll be hiring. It's just a matter of demographics as people go. So the branch that I bumped into most often was the judiciary. The governor puts together the first budget that goes to the legislature. It's called House 1. And the judiciary sends its proposed budget, its ask, to the governor, and the governor incorporates that, or at least considers it in developing House 1, which is, and I think it was true of all of us, comes to the governor's chief counsel.
Yes.
So House 1 came to me, and my instructions were to cut 10% out of the judicial branch's budget. And 10% is a big number, right? You can manage your way through a 5% cut in almost any organization, but 10% really is going to hurt and would really, in my view, affect core functions of the judicial branch, which is not good. So we hit the books, and we realized that Newton, one of the wealthiest areas of Massachusetts, their district court here in Newton collected at the time maybe 10 cents on every dollar of every fine, fee, and assessment that was required under the statutes. Lawrence, one of the poorest areas in Massachusetts at the time, collected about 63 cents on every dollar of every mandatory fees, fines, and assessment. And so what we did is we built the budget. We took House 1 and we built the budget, and we said, okay, we're going to create this thing called retained revenue, where the judiciary, if they hit a certain ceiling for what they collected last year, gets to keep $40 million. That basically that 10% that we're going to cut, they got to keep it, but they have to collect it. And the standard that we're going to hold everybody to is the Lawrence standard. So everybody has to collect what the poorest court in Massachusetts collects. And if you can't collect it, you, judge, who's the one who gets to decide the waiver, you get to tell your clerk why you're laying them off, because you didn't do what Lawrence does.
How'd that work out?
Well, there's 2 stories, and I'm glad you asked. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, the Chief Justice of the Trial Court, and the President of the Massachusetts Bar Association issued a joint press release slamming Romney for this outrageous cut, tantamount, because there's no way that money would ever be there. It's this $40 million that we were banking on was imaginary, would never be there. And I've never seen, ever, the Chief Justice of any court slam a governor in a press release, and I got to be the guy that. So what was interesting is that year it passed. Every single penny of the $40 million was collected and put into the budget, so the judiciary's budget, instead of a 10% cut, was level funded, which was amazing. When Governor Patrick came in, to his great credit, he continued in House
Kept
One.
a lot of your great ideas, Dan.
He kept the retained revenue account, but unlike Romney, who'd I think said 40 million, Governor Patrick increased it to like 57 million. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, the trial court, and the then president of the Massachusetts Bar Association issued another joint press release praising the governor for his foresight in funding the judicial branch by this retained revenue account. And somebody called me up and said, "What do you think?" I said, "It's good to be a Democrat in Massachusetts." What can I tell you?
Don,
Well,
relations with
what
other
occurs to
branches?
me is actually the part of the job that I probably, in sheer number of hours, I probably spend the least amount of time on, which is the review of legislation. And we all brought to the job our own background. Lon talked about how he was in-house counsel, Dan was a judge, Kate had been in the office beforehand. So I brought, to some extent, having been an assistant AG for a number of years, representing the state in litigation against the state. And often you spend your time representing the state where there's ambiguity in the legislation, or the legislation doesn't make any sense, and you're assistant attorney general, and you say, how could anybody pass this? Did anybody read this? Okay.
No, as a member of the House, I can tell you. No.
So I remember the first time, and sometimes you have to make quick decisions because the legislation gets bunched up, particularly at the end of a session. And so the governor looks to you. We had a process, and probably all governors do, where it first goes to the cabinet secretary to review it, and they look, and then it comes back to you. But you're the final person, right, before it goes to the governor. I remember going into I can't remember whether it was the chief secretary to the governor or to the governor himself. I can't remember, giving a reason why he needed to veto this legislation or maybe send it back because it just didn't make any sense. And it wasn't, and they kind of looked at me like, "Are you nuts?
Been there.
Are you want me to veto this because there's an ambiguity in the law?" I mean, kind of get with the program was sort of his look on his face. And you realize that's why, because the political cost, if he vetoes it, that's a problem, right? Because he's pissed off somebody who favored it and upset. And plus if he favors the legislation in general, they run the risk that it's going to change. And if he sends it back with amendments, it's the same problem, and this all happens, sometimes this happens at the end of the legislative session, so it's either a pocket veto or a straight veto. You can't send it back to anybody because the legislature has disappeared, they're gone. So you kind of get to that, but the practical part of the job, which is you hold your nose and you say, yes, sign it, Governor.
Yeah, by the way, the stinkiest spending in state government, probably the federal government too, has the nicest names, like the Fund to Protect Puppies and Kittens.
Yeah.
Who would ever veto that? But it's actually like some guy's nephew who does nothing on the job, right?
Yeah.
But,
So when you read in a case book about or you read in a current case and it say, the courts spend years interpreting, the ambiguity or gap in the law, and you say, well, why? I don't get that. How could this happen? That's how it happens,
Yeah, 2 in the morning.
2 in the morning, yeah,
2
right?
in the morning.
So they took the easy ones, right?
Yeah.
So they took the governor's council. My line on the governor's council is I say John Adams gave them to us and he's not here to take them back. I think I'll sort of talk about something that I think I benefited from doing this job, being in the office at one point and taking a long way and coming back. And that is that the State House, the people who work in the State House or in that neighborhood refer to the State House as the building, right? And it really encompasses not only the State House itself, but the state office buildings in that neighborhood. And I think what governors have to understand, and I think sometimes our new governors over the last 20 years, some of them got it and some of them took a while to get it. And I think the staffs have to understand even more that this organism of state government, it has been there. It was there the people in it were there for 20 years before you got there, and they know that they will be there 20 years after you leave. And the governor is there typically 4 years or 8 years, and the chief legal counsel is typically, I haven't done the math, 3 years, plus the over-under is probably 3 years on most of the folks who've had the job, right? And I think in order to succeed in this job, or to try to succeed, or in many jobs, you have to be very respectful of the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, if you come in and say, the way you guys and girls have been doing this for the last 20 years is ridiculous, let me tell you how we're gonna do this. That will be really good. Not at all. Right? So I think the thing that I hopefully have incorporated, and I think Governor Baker, having also been there about 15 years ago and come back, is to understand the environment which you work. Politics, state politics in Massachusetts or any state is a particular brand. If you join a law firm, it's a particular brand. If you join a company, it's a particular brand. But intentionally in state government, where the executive and his staff or her staff are so transient, you have to be very respectful of the institutions and the longevity that people have. Because, you know, the T broke this year, right? If you go to the legislature, they would say, well, we passed T bills 6 years ago, 4 years ago, 2 years ago. What do you mean it broke? We fixed it. Well, it's still broken, right? So you have to be respectful of all those things and say, well, you did all this and this, but why don't we try that? You can't come in like a know-it-all, because you probably don't, and you certainly won't succeed.
And you won't have fun, and it's a really, we haven't even talked about what a fun
right,
job
right.
it is.
It's the
but,
best job. It's the
You will
best
not
job you
enjoy
can.
it if you come in with that attitude and don't appreciate what Lon just said, which I think is really dead on.
Next, I have some questions where I don't know that we'll be able to hear from everyone on all 4 questions, but we will see who would like to jump in and cast a vote. On the first one, some of you might have worked for a governor who periodically was under doctor's care for a bout of Potomac fever.
Oh, good, I'm out.
How did that affect your ability to impress on governor and the governor's senior staff that we're a government of laws and not of men?
It's Kate.
No, it's not.
Or no one, they can
Well,
always
you know,
use
so-
the answer.
Yeah, so I worked for Governor Dukakis 87 to 90, and he ran for president in 88. He was the Democratic nominee, those of you who weren't alive at the time in 1988. And it affected a lot. It affected a lot. Sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. And by the way, he was very clear that you work for me in the State House, you don't work for me in the campaign. So he was very kind of holier than Caesar, so to speak, Caesar's wife, to sort of in that demarcation. So, you know, I kind of rode the wave of the good times and all that when it looked like he might conceivably actually be president. We were besieged by public information requests, you know, during that period of time. That dominated certainly for some period of time. And then when he lost and came back to the State House, there was a serious budget crisis and all that. I'll tell you one quick story that I don't think I've ever said this in public. I guess I don't think I'm violating any confidence. Governor was, we haven't talked about whether there's a difference whether you're a client, whether the governor's a lawyer or not a lawyer. So Dukakis, I don't know if it makes, so he hasn't practiced in a long time as governor. He was in the state legislature and the like. But he went to Harvard Law School. He was a very, very smart guy and a very good lawyer. But he listened to advice, lawyers' advice, namely my advice. One of the few times he pushed back was during the campaign. And because part of what I didn't have any expertise when it came to campaign laws, but had a lot of expertise when it came to conflict of interest under the state law, under 268A. And part of my job was to keep him on the, make sure. So I don't know if you know the Dukakis and the snowblower, but during the 88 campaign, he had this old snowblower, and it became, so he lives in Brookline, still does, same house, and it became sort of a badge of pride, this old snowblower that he's had since like 25 years, and he's out there by himself, and the press liked it, and the public liked it.
With the sweater.
The sweater. So he goes during the campaign, he goes up to some factory in, I think, Wisconsin or Minnesota, where they make snowblowers, and they give him a snowblower. So he comes back, and they're going to ship it back to him. And he says, can I keep the snowblower? And I do some research. I said, no, you can't keep the snowblower. That was one of the few times he says, are you sure?
He's well known as being.
Are you sure? I got that.
For being frugal too.
I got that in my, I got that in my capacity as a candidate. Are you sure about that, Don? Yeah, it was one of the few times he pushed back. So it made a difference.
That's great.
Anybody want to comment on what Don alluded to, which is the job any different when your client, the governor, is a person with a law degree or a practicing lawyer in the past? Do you
I
think
think it makes it,
matters?
I think it makes a difference. I mean, because Governor Baker is not a lawyer
Right.
and is a business guy who's had general counsel giving advice for a time, and I think it's different than working for someone who's a lawyer, even if they haven't practiced much. I mean, Governor Weld hadn't, they were all with the same law firm, a firm that's now defunct called Hill and Barlow, but.
Governor Patrick was there too.
Yeah, they were all there. I think it does make a significant difference. It's a little hard to articulate exactly why, but, I think,
How
you know.
about you, Kate? Governor Patrick held a series
Yeah,
of
and
legal.
he's a brilliant
he's a
lawyer.
real lawyer.
He's a brilliant lawyer, and but he also, I think, had a lot of respect for, you know, when I was giving him ethical advice about a gift,
Gifts.
he would listen. He didn't pretend that he was an expert on state ethics law, you know, and valued my advice. And certainly, he'd say, "I want to talk to Kate about this issue." I think in part, and I not that you would need a law degree to have this, but I think he understood like the importance of getting those things right. But he also, you know, if you're talking to him about the new Supreme Court case decision, he was always just 10 steps ahead of you, you know, if you're trying to help him. How am I going to talk about this? And he'd say, well, this is what I want to say. And he's already, you know, way ahead of wherever I was going.
Yeah.
So.
Dan,
Governor
Governor
Romney's,
Romney had both
he was
business
both, yeah.
degree and law degree, but
Right.
never practiced law. How do you think that
He was Harvard
affected your
Business and
relationship?
Harvard Law.
Right.
He actually practiced as an intern, I guess, in the U.S. Attorney's Office for one summer, which was enough to convince him that he wanted to go into
I didn't know
business.
that, really? You did?
Yeah, yeah. Not in Massachusetts, in Michigan.
Surprisingly.
Very bright guy, but in terms of the law, he would understand concepts. And what we would do oftentimes with Governor Romney is we would prepare things 3 different ways because we didn't know which way he wanted to go. And we needed to be able to execute quickly depending on which way he went. So, you know, we'd stay up all night long and get these 3 things together, and then he'd say, okay, well, what about this 4th way? It's like, oh,
It's
okay,
awesome.
Let me
Yeah,
get
no,
back to you.
we all work for governors who were really, really smart folks.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing, but you're totally challenged. I
Right.
mean, and Governor Weld, when I was deputy, he's also a very smart guy. And he's that annoying smart guy that's in your class who never does any homework, right? But shows up and probably stays out a little too late partying, and shows up the next day and looks at 3 things and then asks the one question that you've said, well, I know all the answers, I'm not so sure of this one, but I can get by. So,
Yeah.
so it really is one of the things that, I mean, I don't know what it would be like to work for a governor who was adult, but it makes the job fantastic.
Yeah.
What about difference of party? All of you, some of you work for Republican governors, some of you work for Democrats. But throughout that time, the Massachusetts legislature is dominated by Democrats. So do you think that affects?
I think
the
it's
role
harder
of
when it's the same
counsel?
party.
I do too.
I really do,
Yeah.
because you kind of know.
I agree with
Yeah,
Don.
I mean, but it's complicated. If you Democrat, you know, legislature's dominated by Democrats, but you know, to some extent, they think that they have a friend in the state, in the corner office, and it's complicated, because is the best way to describe it.
And that's one of the things I talked about, the institutions in Massachusetts. You know, we have a governor, and the governor is in charge of the executive branch, but the Speaker of the House and the Senate President are very, very, very powerful people. And if you show up in governor, I think you're in charge of anything.
Right.
You you get your reality readjusted after a
Right.
while, I think.
Right.
I'm going to ask a final question, then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Some of you worked at the beginning of administrations, some of you saw the end of administrations. American artist Thomas Cole painted a famous series of 5 works entitled Course of Empire. The paintings were entitled The Savage State, The Arcadian or Pastoral State, The Consummation of Empire, Destruction, and Desolation. Now, we certainly don't want to assign any particular council or governors or time periods to necessarily to these paintings, but I thought we might ask, were your duties or performance affected by the period in the course of empire in which you served?
I'll go first, 'cause
Jumped in
like I said, I started at the beginning of the Patrick administration. I mean, from the moment he took the oath in January 2007, and with my one hiatus in the Senate Ways and Means, and then came back and completed with him. And as I said, my priorities as chief legal counsel, in addition to all the other great things that a CLC usually works on, were archives and records retention, which obviously has to do with the wind down, and legacy pieces, making sure we filled every judicial vacancy. There was a sense of urgency because, you know, we didn't get to take our time like Lon's getting to do right now.
There's nothing to do.
No, there are surprising, I was
I
hoping you
know.
were going to take care of that. There's a surprising number of vacancies in the district.
We filled every vacancy prior to,
I
seriously,
know,
there
but
were no
some people
vacancies
waited
when
to
I left.
leave.
I know, they're your friends.
No.
And then, and what was my third thing that I had said? Oh, clemency. And it is a reality that it seems that governors tend to look to clemency in their finale. I think it was different in Governor Dukakis's day, but things have changed in the last few administrations. And so my work was very much impacted by the time we were at. And then there was just a general sense, you know, Governor Patrick had a lot of things he wanted to accomplish, and 8 years is a long time. We all look very different than we did and older than we did when we came. But at the same time, it goes by quickly. And I think that reality of, goodness, I really wanted to do that, and I wanted to do that, and wanted to get this done, and the reality of the clock running, I think, was upon us. And then also because the legal office is in charge of ethics advising, not just to the governor, although that's our number one priority, but we had a lot of folks that were obviously needed to get a paycheck when they left. And so we kind of felt like we had a running circle of people, staff members constantly coming in asking about, you know, exit and engagement with, you know, talking to about future employment, et cetera. So it did flavor our work, I think, in a really great way too. It was, you know, exciting because we tried to run to the finish line, but
Anyone
sad
else on
too.
that?
Well, I would say to my team, you know, who gets to do this? You get to do things who gets to do this stuff? This is amazing, the stuff we get to do. The first job that I had for Romney, the first piece of paper that I constructed with my team was what's called a National Guard arming order, because it was the year after 9/11. The governor, you can't carry bullets as a member of the National Guard in the state unless the governor, as the commander-in-chief, says so. And so Romney signed an order, say, you know, our National Guards, like 6 months after, you get to keep bullets in your guns. Who gets to do that? I get to put guns in the bullets of the National Guard. But every tiny little thing was amazing. The thing that was,
You served at the beginning.
I served at the beginning. I was a beginning guy, and was just amazing what the things you get to do, and that you don't not even care to do. You just get to do these things.
You get questions too, and you're like, I don't know.
Well,
Let me pop open my Constitution and look at
I'm
that
sure
up.
that
It's
it was
really
the same with
fun.
these
When
folks
do you
too,
get to do
but
that?
when the governor's office, constituent services, fields a phone call, they go by topic and they assign it to whatever agency that fits the topic. Any weird things that they can't answer, they go to governor's legal. And so I would get calls, you know, from people, and I would always make sure I'd get home phone numbers, and I'd call back, you know, the hours are crazy, call back at like 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night, this is Governor Romney's office returning your call. Fred, come on, it's like, is this you, Fred? Like, no, really, it's Governor Romney's office calling.
Don, you served at the end of the.
Yeah, but it was,
last
you know, but I was there for 3 years, so it was, again, as I said, it was during as he was ramping up to run for president, and then when he ran for president, so certainly there were a lot of things that he was trying to get done. And then, yeah, I was there pretty much, I didn't stay for some personal reasons. My parents were in ill health, so I left before the end of the administration. But just to build on what Kate and Dan said, it is a great job. I mean, there's some days you come home and you say, what did I do today, right? I didn't stop moving, but and Lon may, and you know, when you're not the person in charge, you don't see this quite as clearly. You have a perch, a very unique perch on state government.
Fantastic.
That gives you access to the governor. I mean, I'm sure it's true for all of us. I could walk into didn't matter whether I had an appointment or whether I had an appointment, you could pretty much walk into the governor's office at will, because if you felt it was important enough to see the governor, you could. So, you know, when he was in town, I could be in there 2 or 3 times a day. And you do, when you're dealing with the AG's office, you have this unique perspective on what's happening in the entire state government that I'm not sure any other position has. You know?
Just to echo that and maybe to finish up. My last job before this was general counsel at a company called BJ's Wholesale Club, big retailer, big job, big team, all that stuff. So Governor Baker knew that I was interested in coming to work for him, and he called me and he said, we should get together and talk. And he kept asking me, like, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to give up this corporate stuff? And I said to him, well, let me tell you, when I was a college student, I grew up in Maine, and my goal in life actually was to be governor of Maine. And so I was an intern twice during my college years in the governor of Maine's office. Governor of Maine, nice guy, Joe Brennan. He probably had 4 or 5 people on his staff who did the work and a few support people, but it was a small state. And I was assigned to work for the legal counsel. And I looked at the governor. I said, well, that's the job I want, but if you can't get to be that job, this lawyer job's a pretty good job. And then in the middle of the first term of the Weld administration, a guy named Brackett Denniston, who was my mentor at the law firm, called me up and said that he was going to become Governor Weld's second chief legal counsel. Did I want to join him? And once I got over the fact that I wasn't a Republican and they didn't care, I went and took that job. And again, I looked at Governor Weld and I said, well, that's the best job. But this lawyer job's pretty good. So then when I was in Charlie Baker's kitchen in November last year, I said to him, you think I just came up with this idea to come work for you. This is the job I've been trying to get for 35 years. And it's really that good a job. And state government is really that good a place to work. And the governor's office, as Don said and everyone else echoed, is the perch. There are people there and they're there for a long time, and you have to be respectful of that perspective. But if you pick up the phone and say you're calling from the governor's office, I learned that when I was 19. You call from the governor's office, people answer and you get things done. And you only see the most interesting issues, because that's what percolates up to your client.
The one thing that I want to add, because everyone who's here, presumably you've got some interest in public sector work or something like that. And often somebody will say, I'm sure you guys have had that experience, well, how did you get to be chief legal counsel? And part of the answer is we did other things before we were chief legal counsel, which prepared us for that job. So you're not going to, Ron may have wanted it for 30 years, but think of all the things he did to get ready for that. So I would encourage each of you to think about some stint. Doesn't mean you have to spend your entire career. None of us have spent our entire career in the public sector, but spend part of your career in the public sector. It is the most satisfying thing you'll do. There are sacrifices you make in terms of time, in terms of the economics, but pound for pound, hour for hour, it's the most interesting, satisfying thing you'll do.
Okay, well, now let's hear from the audience and any questions you might have. To the panel as a whole or individual members, yes?
First of all, thanks for being here. We appreciate it, taking the time. Before law school, I worked for the governor of a much smaller state, and we had what I think was a unique situation that our chief legal counsel had served previously under 2 Republican governors, stayed on for independent, who's now been retained by a Democrat. So she served kind of all, across the ideological spectrum. Mr. Povich, I think you kind of alluded to this, but how important do you think it is to kind of share your boss's ideological outlook, at least kind of generally? Do you think you can, it is primarily a legal position, but does it help, or is it a deal breaker to kind of agree politically and philosophically with their outlook?
I think it depends on your client.
Yep.
Depends on the governor.
And it depends on their positions on
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a Democrat and the governor's Republican, I'm probably aligned with him. Well, you'll never hear that I'm not aligned with him on any issue. but I'm probably really aligned with him on 95% of the issues.
Yeah.
Or 98% of the issues. So I'm completely comfortable with it. A friend of mine used to say that if you weren't aligned, it would be like, the kamikaze pilot who flew 5 missions. You were involved, but you weren't committed. I don't have that problem.
Right.
I'm totally committed. I think Kate's right. It depends on your client and whether you're comfortable representing them. Listen, when I started my career at Goodwin, Procter & Hoare, I represented some clients who, I represented some clients. So I think it's I don't think I'm deluding myself. I'm very comfortable. And honestly, I have this understanding, the governor knows that I'm a Democrat, and the governor knows when I disagree with him, but you won't know. So that works out.
Yeah. Romney, who had a pretty partisan administration in terms of the last 2 years. The first 2 years when I was involved, he made a point to be bipartisan as an approach. I think actually the majority of Democrats or independents on his cabinet. But the chief counsel's job is too important for politics. It really is. The politics, they actually have political lawyers in their campaigns. The chief counsel's job and the legal structure, they need good advice. And good advice is really not political at all.
I will say it's the most rewarding legal job I think I'll probably ever have. And I didn't dream of being the governor, but I dreamed of being Sam Seaborn on The West Wing. Yeah. So my dream job was to do just what I got to do as chief legal counsel of Governor Patrick, which was work for someone who I really believed in, who I found inspiring, and who I wanted to succeed. That was important to me, and I think it worked well for us. But
Questions?
What surprised you the most in your job?
For me, it was the fact that all of the lawyers in state government are unionized. I was very surprised by that. Not the Attorney General's office, but the executive branch counsel are all in a union. And when we had organized, said at the outset, we organized all the lawyers into, the 600 agency virtual law office. My governor then announced that because we organized them so well, we could actually reduce their numbers, because who needs 600 lawyers? There was the union didn't take well to that, and I got to experience being picketed in my job. And that was
In the West Wing.
Yeah, it's like, I gave up my judgeship for this. But that was interesting. And to Lon's point, these are people who've been there before you got there, and they're going to be there long after you're gone. And so from that really shaky beginning, we were able to develop a really great, respectful, constructive relationship that resulted in legislation getting passed and other good things happening. That was my biggest surprise. I didn't realize you could be in a union if you're a lawyer.
Yes, right here. Yes.
Was there anything that you did in law school that you thought helped prepare you specifically for this job?
Zig Platter's administrative law. Does he still teach it? No, he's good at it.
Sometimes. Yes.
No, I think to be open to opportunities. Yeah, I've had a very non-linear legal career, and it was just because I've been very lucky. That's the key ingredient. But you have to be, if you're willing, you can go one law firm and stay there forever and have a great legal career. But I have plenty of friends who do that, but I think it's richer if, like all of us, you open yourself up to opportunities and do things. And that's something you can't learn in law school. What you can learn in law school is how to read a case, how to do a transaction, how to write, how to express yourself as a lawyer. But it's really the willingness to be open to opportunities that I think is the most important.
Back there.
This was alluded to earlier, your interaction with the Governor's Council. I was wondering if you thought that the Governor's Council should be eliminated. And if you can't answer that question, how does that relationship intersect and can you remove the Governor's Council?
Well, it's in the state constitution, so it would require an amendment to the state constitution, which is a fairly lengthy, cumbersome process. There's going to be, first of all, we're lucky in Massachusetts because judges do not run for office. They do not have to raise money. We don't realize how lucky they are unless you go to a place like Michigan or Florida and you see these ads during campaign season, or you go to Texas and judges are raising money from lawyers who appear before them. And one of the things that pleasantly surprised me about being chief counsel, because you do play an important role when it comes to the selection of judges, the process, and I think we all work for governors who had, almost to a person had a merit-based process. I'm not saying politics was zero, but it was, predominantly a heavily merit-based process. How many people? So it's a long window. There's going to be some check. I don't think any state would permit a governor to appoint a judge and not have some kind of check on that. And if I had to pick between, let's say, the Senate of the Massachusetts legislature and the Governor's Council, I'd pick the Governor's Council.
So what
And I would too,
yeah,
and
right.
I actually, that's where I was going earlier when I started, and then I interrupted my thought, because I said the federal model, obviously we have the Senate, and I agree with Don.
Yeah.
I think the Governor's Council is a better alternative to that, and they are uniquely suited, as I said, that's their main role, to review judicial nominations, and clemency petitions only come before them very rarely, so, no, I don't think it should be eliminated.
I agree with all that, particularly in my current job. But I think the interesting thing about it is how invisible and unknown they are.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to give a speech kind of thing. It wasn't exactly a speech, but to a group of 40 people in Wellesley where I live. And we talked about my role. The Governor's Council came up. I said, how many people in this group of 40, these are typical, not stereotypical, but typical Wellesley folks, highly educated, good jobs. How many of you 40 people know we have a Governor's Council? 12 people put up their hand. How many of you can name your Governor's Counselor? One.
Yeah.
One. So they have a very important role. They make a big, who the judges the governors nominate and who gets approved and who doesn't get approved is a big deal. And this body continues to be, in the shadows. So I think we need this body instead of the other ways that we talked about, but it is interesting that they have such power and they're so invisible.
I agree. I think the Governor's Council is the best check and balance on judicial nominations, because if it's the Senate, for example, all of a sudden legislation gets traded in now into the mix. There's really no trades. I mean, parking spaces, what do they want? I mean, there's nothing, that they want. So but I would televise the Governor's Council. I would shine a light on the Governor's Council meetings, because a great project, by the way, for the media students would be to do the best of highlights every week, video everything that happens in the Governor's Council meeting, and then edit it and shrink it down to a half an hour of hilarity. It would be amazing. It would be great. It would be great.
There are audio recordings available online. There's a fellow named Patrick McMurray, said his last name? McCabe.
Yeah.
Patrick
Oh,
McCabe,
he
he runs a group called the Fatherhood Coalition that has a very particular agenda.
But those are the best recordings.
But he shows up every week and he records diligently. And you miss the video, but if you really want to hear the audio,
They're open to
Patrick
the
has-
public. You could go watch.
Yeah, I'll give you a tour of the governor's office. Come by. But
Other questions, James?
On top of the mentorship, I was wondering if you can speak to some of the mentors that you had in your legal career, and also maybe some of the mentees you've had, perhaps some of the deputy counsels, traits that you really want them to develop.
I think that's a great question. I think it's a great, you asked earlier about classes. I think a great way to figure out, find yourself where you want to be in your career, whether it's government or otherwise, is to have good mentors. Mo Cowan is an amazing mentor to me. I actually first met him when he was still at Mintz Levin. He was interviewed me for a summer associate position, and we always joke because I ultimately didn't go to Mintz. I went to the City of Boston Law Department to work, but we were like, we'll work together someday. And then, of course, 6 years later, we did work together because he came to work for Governor Patrick, and he's just been a tremendous mentor to me. I have a lot of mentors. I'm sure everyone does, and I think the legal community, if you're going to stay in Boston, is packed with them. You've got some great ones here, part of the BC faculty, sitting in front of you, before you, in the room. And I think it's great that you're already thinking about it. And I will toot my horn for government lawyering. I think the government lawyering community here in Massachusetts and the greater Boston area is fabulous. It's strong. You meet really interesting, committed folks who love what they're doing and enjoy thinking about what's the right thing to do. I actually first heard a lawyer energetically speak about that when I was an intern for Don Stern when he was U.S. Attorney at the time, and he had lunch with us, which was nice.
You paid for it. You paid for the lunch, didn't you?
No,
It was a
it was a brown bag.
Government doesn't have any budget for stuff like that. Unlike a
It was a
law
brown
firm, right,
bag.
which is,